Hello! With only a few more days to go before the Read-EH-thon starts on the 1st of July, which is a readathon that has the aim of reading Canadian authors, I sieved through my bookshelves a little bit more and found a few books that are written by Canadian authors. And in order to get excited and pumped for the readathon and maybe also figure out my still very undecided TBR, I thought I'd do the try a chapter tag with the next following 5 books to see if I feel like reading any of them. There are 2 books that have been on my bookshelves for years and I haven't read. There are 2 books that I got from the library and I've also always kind of considered, and I feel like I know what they're about, but I have no reason to assume so because I've never actually looked into them more. And then I have one book that I hauled in the previous video, which I specifically bought because it was by a Canadian author, and I thought I didn't have any books by Canadian authors, but turns out I do. So the first one, which is this book that I specifically hauled and I've already talked about, so I'll cut it short, is Omens by Kelley Armstrong. This sort of mystery thriller, I'm suspecting, is written by a Canadian author, Kelley Armstrong. And the reason why I wanted to try a chapter of this one is because for some reason I'm really prejudiced about this book. I don't actually expect it to be good. I don't know, somehow I feel like the whole editing, publishing, I don't know, it seems trashy to me. Sorry, but maybe I'll love it. So I want to read the first chapter of this one. Then the 2 books I got from the library are, on the one hand, Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Thien. I actually have no clue, which is not great. This story has been going around YouTube quite a bit, about a mother and a daughter, I believe, who take in a Chinese immigrant or someone fleeing China. Well, I don't know much, but I've heard the title named many times and I have also heard that people really like it. And it has red on the cover, which actually is one of the prompts to consider for the readathon, so why not? That's the second one. The third one, also from the library, is The Sealed Letter by Emma Donoghue. Emma Donoghue, as this sticker also indicates on the cover, is the author of Room and also The Wonder. Those 2 novels of hers I have read and enjoyed. I didn't think they were without problems, but I thought she had a really immersive writing style and it was really easy for me to read those books. So this one, much like The Wonder, is a historical fiction novel. And I'm guessing from the blurb on the back that it is about 2 female friends in London some point in the 19th century, and they've sort of lost touch, but then they get together again, and one is sort of pulled into the life of the other and made to sort of keep her affair a secret. And then there are sealed letters, I assume, that are in danger of revealing all these kept secrets. I'm not sure, I'm making up a lot as I go, but I want to try the first chapter of this one also because there were certain things in the room that I didn't like that were down to the way it was written, and that I would be able to tell within the first chapter already, even if you don't really know what the story's about. So I would be able to exclude this one from my list if that turns out, but maybe I will really enjoy it. And then the 2 books that I didn't realise were by Canadian authors and I have had on my shelves for a very long time, on the one hand, are That Elusive Spark by Janet Munsil. I picked this up a few years ago because I was in Canada at the time on holiday in a bookshop, and I was at the time very interested in reading more plays, and this is a play. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to deal with this as in try a chapter. I guess maybe I'll try a scene, or I'll see if this is even broken up into scenes. I never read it. I bought it and never read it. I feel like it was, from what I remember, is that it's about possibly a psychologist and the true story of the case of Phineas Gage. So I still think this is really interesting, but I just have completely forgotten that I had this. And then the final one, also sort of out of the ordinary because it's not a typical novel. It is a non-fiction book called The Stuff of Thought by Steven Pinker. This was gifted to me many, many years ago because I studied psychology, and at the time I was gifted this, I was also particularly interested in language and the psychology of language and how language and the power of the word influences how we see the world and how we engage with others. So Steven Pinker has written many, many, many things. I even have another non-fiction book of his, but I kind of need to test out if I currently have the concentration to sit through a whole non-fiction book of his. So I think trying one chapter and seeing what the tone is of this will be great. So those 5 books I am going to try the first chapter of, and I'll check in with you later and see what I thought. So I just finished reading the prologue and the first chapter of Omens. Both of those together were only something like 11 pages. And so far, I feel like I could read this really quickly. I am afraid though that I'll understand, or I'll be able to predict how she is constructing the thriller. So the story is about a woman who finds out that she was adopted and her biological parents are serial killers. And then she tries to find out more about that. And the prologue and the first chapter don't actually introduce that yet. We just find out who this main character is and who her supposed parents are. But, well, spoiling from the blurb on the back, I guess we know that those are her adoptive parents. And it's just so very gimmicky. So, for instance, there's a prologue, which is a flashback, which in these sort of thrillers, which you suppose have a twist, I already kind of find a bit formulaic. And then there's an author's note at the front telling you that there are almost like Easter eggs within the books, that if you look up certain words, you'll find out plot points that you'd miss otherwise. In the very first chapter, she's engaged, and we find out that she's planning on going to study, even though she comes from this sort of spoiled background where no one expects her to actually work, but she does volunteer work instead. So, oh, she's so good. But then at the same time she wants to study, and she hasn't told her fiance that she's been looking at schools there. I already don't like the main character, which isn't necessary, especially not in a thriller that's supposed to be like sort of gritty and like she's the child of serial killers. I don't have to need her to be likable, but I am not convinced by this so far. So I've just finished the first 25 pages of the sealed letter. I read to the sort of first natural break because the first chapter is 70 pages and I want a break and I'm hungry and I want to make food. But it starts really, really promisingly. We get a little glimpse into these 2 women who are probably at the forefront of the story. They bump into each other after not having heard from each other in years and having lost contact. Our main character, or who I think will be the main character of this book, ponders the relationship of this other woman and her husband. The 2 women met because the younger works for the older as a sort of maid friend, some kind of, I don't really understand yet. But she's taken in by this married couple and she likes both of them, but their marriage is really difficult and marked by a lot of conflict and argument. So far I'm really liking it. I don't always like historical novels, especially if they seem a bit stuffy, but this one seems quite fast-paced, a lot of dialogue in the beginning, but we're getting a bit more introspection into the main character already now, a few pages on. So I'm tempted to read on with this one actually. I'm going to take a short break and then see when I pick up the next chapter, and I'll check in with you later. I just finished the first chapter in Do Not Say We Have Nothing, which was something like 33 pages, and it's beautiful. So we learn of, from the point of view of a 10-year-old girl, 11-year-old girl, Marie, and her mother, and they are mourning the loss of her father and the mom's husband, obviously. He's committed suicide and he's left a really big hole in their lives. There's this really horrible scene where the girl is in the bathtub and she realizes that she loved her father more than her mother, but not in a sort of bratty way, just in a sort of sorrowful way, realizing that he was the person that both her and her mum's life revolved around, and now they only have each other, except for a teenage girl, a young woman who flees China and ends up being taken in by the mother and Marie. The girl is really fascinated by her because this girl is a true Chinese girl, not like her growing up in Canada, never properly learning the language of her parents. So really, really interesting. Not a plot that usually would draw me in, I feel like, but I'm really liking it. The writing is beautiful. I also enjoyed the fact that her father used to be a concert pianist, and there are a few sort of music notations and notes throughout the text. Also at some point the daughter talks about her distress really on how she doesn't master the Chinese letters, signs. And then she also gives examples of those. So I did think that really livened up the text. Liked it so much more than I thought I would. Hey, so it's the next day and I just finished reading the first 28 pages in the play by Janet Munsil called That Elusive Spark. I thought I'd read the first scene or act or something like that, but seeing as it's only 2 acts and it only covers 120 pages or something like that, that would mean reading almost the entire thing. I'm not sure how I feel about this quite yet. I was correct in thinking that it plays on the historic case of Phineas Gage, whose brain is damaged by a long sort of metal rod shooting through his brains. But I didn't realise how it was structured, so it flips back and forth in between sort of mini scenes or dream sequences, not quite sure yet, between Dr. Helen something or other, who is a neuropsychologist and has just travelled to this university to give a lecture, which she is very, very nervous about. And then there are scenes with Phineas Gage, but so far he's healthy and knocking around without a pole in his brain, so I'm not quite sure yet where that's going to end up. Seems a bit weird to say this because this is a play. I'm finding it a bit theatrical. I feel like I'm going to finish reading it because it is so short, and I think it's a shame that I haven't read it so far. I think reading plays on the whole sometimes requires a little bit of getting used to, because obviously you only have the script, the dialogue, and well, it's the actors that bring it to life. But this one is an easy one to read as far as reading plays, in my opinion. So I have one more book to read, a non-fiction novel, so I'll see how quickly I get on with that one, and I'll check in with you for a sort of final thoughts on my 5 books. Yeah. I've just finished reading the first chapter in The Stuff of Thought by Steven Pinker. The first chapter is called Words and Worlds. And in these 24 pages, basically Steven Pinker introduces what the book is going to be about. He talks about the importance of words and how one word can have many different meanings, and how the semantics behind the wording of things can have real life impact. Nice, you're getting a little show, my dog's scratching herself. So this chapter is based loads on examples. So he, for instance, talks about how the two planes crashing into the World Trade Centers in 9/11 can be construed as either one event if you think of 9/11 as one event, or if they can be thought of two events, two planes flying into two buildings, and how that has real repercussions in the law case for the owner of these buildings. He also, this seems very unrelated, but he does manage to tie it all together, talk about William Shakespeare and how the definition of William Shakespeare, if you were to look it up in a dictionary, doesn't cover and doesn't hold true for the whole discussion of whether William Shakespeare was in fact William Shakespeare. He goes on to talk about names, and he touches about on all these different aspects of semantics, and I guess they will then be covered in more detail in the different chapters. And for that reason, I think I'd lose interest if I were to read this, to be honest. I sometimes struggle with this with non-fiction books when I feel like they're overwhelming me with lots and lots of examples and I've already grasped the point they are trying to make. I then start to get a bit bored. What I also found really, really interesting reading this book, though, is so it was published in 2008, and so this book being 10 years old, some of the parts already seem dated. He talks about words that have made it like to blog and to Google and to BlackBerry, and I found myself thinking, who says I'm gonna BlackBerry it? So that was fun, but I don't really see myself picking this one up based on the first chapter, I'm afraid. So yeah, those were the 5 books. I'm only fully excluding the non-fiction Steven Pinker book. All the others have something going for them. They're either short or, on first impression, great, or a quick read. So I'll kind of see where my mood takes me, and I hope you liked my first little impression of these 5 books by Canadian authors, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye!